Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brown, and thank you so much for joining me as we continue to explore the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and generally the use of sound for health and wellness. Today, our guest is Michael Bettine, a professional percussionist, composer, music educator, and writer. This is Michael's second time on this podcast series. We talked back in August of 2019, and I will link to that episode in the show notes so you can listen back. And we talk a lot about his background in progressive rock and improvisation, and when he discovered a deep fascination with gongs. I just listened back to the episode recently, and there's so many wonderful nuggets of information about the gongs, gong culture, and the development of gongs and gong philosophy. Really great conversation to listen back to. In this episode today, we're going to be discussing Michael's two new books, The Way of the Gong, Explorations and Observations in Sound, and the other book, Art as a Spiritual Practice. So we get into a bit about his intention with the books, how he put them together, what inspired him to put these together, as well as, overall what are in these books. And so we dive in deeper to some of the content, both when it comes to philosophy and maybe dispelling some myths when it comes to the gongs, questions he gets asked. He often gets similar questions. So we talk about some of those things that would be helpful, as well as we dig a little bit deeper into some things that might be helpful to you if you're a sound practitioner or gong player when it comes to putting together gong sessions, as well as then connecting to your art, your sound work as a spiritual practice. So it's really a beautiful discussion about his books, but also kind of exploring some concepts beyond that. And so I really hope that you enjoy this conversation with Michael Bettine. This episode is sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa, located in Sarasota, Florida. The Om Shop is the country's largest showroom of vibrational tools. So crystal bowls, Himalayan bowls, gongs, tuning forks, bells, and chimes, but all these custom, beautiful instruments as well. So if you're looking for something particular, if you're looking for advice on how to kind of up-level your sound healing collection, they are extremely helpful and can advise you as well. So reach out to theomshop.com. If you're able to make it there in person, they have a luxury spa as well there in Sarasota. So thank you so much to the Om Shop for their support and sponsorship of this podcast. Please enjoy this episode with Michael Bettine. All right. Welcome, Michael. So great to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, I'm really glad. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
It has. Yeah, I was just mentioning that listening back to the previous episode with you, you could just hear the excitement and thrill and inspiration in our voices. We had just gotten back from the Gong Summit. This was 2019. Yeah.
Yeah, that was such an exciting event. I think everybody was probably buzzing for months after that, just trying to process everything.
And what's interesting, you mentioned, I think actually the dedication in your book is to Sheila Whitaker. Thanks for asking. And of course, that ask happened at the Gong Summit, but you've
Right.
been writing articles, blogs for years. So is that what finally pushed you to, okay, it's time to put this together into a book?
Yeah, really, in a lot of ways, because, I asked Sheila, I said, did you bring some of your books? And she said, wow, well, when are you writing your book, Michael? And it's like, okay, I guess I've been promising a book for years, and it's finally, well, I got to do it. And then the whole COVID thing happened, and things and other things happened, and kind of kept derailing the project. But I kept, pushing forward little by little, and finally, here we are.
That's right. Yeah, here we are. And so In a way, it's compilation of writings. I think the way of the Gong blog is what started about 10 years ago. Is that right? 2014?
Probably around then.
Something like that. And then, so, the book, The Way of the Gong, same title, is not only a compilation of some of your writings, but kind of expanded and updated from that.
Right.
And so I'm curious, your initial intention uh, with the book when you first put it together. I just want to read a quote that's actually from the foreword. And I want to see if that's really was your goal. This is from Mike Tamburo, who I thought wrote this beautifully. The Way of the Gong seems to be created with the intention of moving the Gong community forward, to move beyond collective mistakes, misunderstandings, and trappings, and to find something more pure and more true. Each player's unique experience with the sound of the gong itself. Right? So written by Mike Tamburo. Was that your intention, or what was your goal when you decided to put this together?
Well, I think Mike summed it up real well in that paragraph. But also, yeah, I mean, if I looked at my blogs and I go, wow, there's a couple books here because there's a lot of writing. So what I did is initially I just started reading through everything, both the Way of the Gong blog and the Percussion Deconstruction blog, which had preceded that by about 3 years or 4 years. And I was writing about gongs on that, and that's where suddenly the gong posts were getting a lot of response. So it's like, well, I need a separate gong blog, thus the Way of the Gong. And I started reading through a lot of that, and I found different themes that ran through the material, but they were spread out so far. Like there might be something in March of this year, and in September there'd be something else that would connect to it, and then there'd be another one over here. So I thought, what if I took a lot of this material and put them in sort of chapters and connected these ideas that really belong together. And then in reading it, I mean, some of the blogs, were 5, 6, 8, 10 years old, whatever. Things had changed. I had changed. My ideas about things had changed. So I wanted to update them and also have a chance to revisit the material. And some of it I expanded because I had new ideas or new information to include. And some of it is new writing that I had done since I stopped writing that blog. So I thought it would be a nice place to just put together all this information. And a lot of this too, these were questions that I get asked every week by people, either in an email or, in a message on some, internet place. And I thought, well, let's put a lot of these popular questions together so the book can also be a resource. I mean, there's it's not so much a teaching manual, although there are some exercises I've put in there, but more as a resource of covering all these different ideas that, again, people ask me about all the time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I have so many notes and post-it notes throughout it. There's just so many gems that it's something I'm going to be rereading many times. I love an early heading that you have. Most everything you probably know about gongs is wrong.
Right.
Right. So, in your 45 plus years of collecting and playing gongs, you started at a time where there weren't resources. You really had to connect with people, reach out
Right.
to people. You probably couldn't find all these various styles of gongs or even like hear what they sound like we can now. And now it's almost like there's an overabundance of information, which is sometimes misleading and confusing, right? So it seems to me one overarching goal of yours is to kind of help with what you wrote there. Most everything you probably know about the gong is wrong. Do you want to just kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, as you probably know, I mean, you just have to go on the internet, Facebook, Instagram, any sort of social media, and or even just Google gongs or gong sound or gong healing or anything like that. And you find so much stuff that is just it's just a waste of space, really. It's today. Now, when I started working on all this gong stuff, that was pre-internet, so it was even more difficult to find information. But when you found information, it tended to be correct because only people who had information, were publishing it in various sources, whether it be books or even notes on a record sleeve, um, advertising material from like PASIC or somebody. And now it's just like anybody can write and anybody can publish anything. Anybody can have a blog or just whatever. So the proliferation of information is astounding, but it's almost like prospecting for gold. You have to go through so much junk and stuff to find that little nugget of gold nowadays. And it's an interesting thing because we have all this information, but there's so much disinformation too.
Right. And how would you know, especially if you're just getting into this, whether you're finding the gold nugget or something that's just,
Exactly. And that's why like I was just at Gong Camp Portugal, and all the people who were on the faculty there, we're all trying to transmit some truth there, as opposed to spreading more of these memes that you see, that go all over the internet. And I keep seeing these same memes. I've seen them for like 10 years now, and it's like, please, somebody stop them. It's the same misinformation that goes around.
right. Right. Well, let's look at a couple of those from your book, actually. I think
Sure.
one, just to kind of spark more conversation, is in context of maybe what a bowl or gong has been labeled as or marketed as, right? Okay, so this bowl is for the throat chakra, or this gong, it will, heal your DNA because it has this frequency in it, right? So the chakra tunings and kind of the frequencies. This is a quote from your book, and it's actually a bit of a story that I think really hits the nail on the head. So you write, my wife had a knee injury a few years ago and was laid up for about 8 weeks. I suggested we work with the bowls to assist in her healing, but I didn't go looking for a knee bowl. What I did was try various bowls placed by her knee and struck them to see what effect she felt. We went along until she exclaimed, wow, I really feel that. Thus, we found a bowl that resonated with her knee and then worked with that one.
Hmm.
Right. And it sounds so simple, but it's almost like, people that get into this field are looking for the sound pill, the
Oh,
frequency to
exactly.
fix that, or, so yeah.
The magic bowl that
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
will do that every time. Well, all this goes back to my philosophy from years of personal experience. I have to say this book is written from my point of view, my personal experience. I can't speak of other people's experience, which could be very different. But from my experience of working with gongs and bowls and doing hundreds and hundreds of sessions and talking with other people who do the same thing, is, to me, the universe is fluid. And I study a lot of alchemy and hermeticism and mysticism and things like that. And that's one thing you find out. There is nothing that is fixed in the universe because the universe is constantly changing and evolving. So the minute you try to work with some sort of fixed thing, like, okay, 432 hertz will do X for everybody, I don't think that can work Now, it might do it for some people, but there's no way any sort of frequency, one frequency will do the same thing for everybody because of this fluidity. We are all different. We all have different experiences, different feelings, different emotions. And even, the me of right now in this moment will be different tomorrow at the same time. So again, everything is fluid. So I find it difficult to work with any idea of a fixed thing because the minute I try to, and I've had this happen at sessions, I usually do a Q&A after because people are curious about everything, the sounds, the instruments. And someone will point out, and they'll point out to one of the gongs. And when you hit that gong, I could really feel it in my head. And somebody else will say, well, when you hit that same gong, I felt it in my stomach. So it's this fluidity where people feel things differently. And I could do the same thing. I could say, here's a heart chakra bowl. And I'd play it, and someone might go, well, I feel it in my throat chakra. Or someone will say, oh, I do feel it in my heart. And someone will say, well, I feel it more in my stomach and abdomen area. So, again, this is personal experience of working with people and finding that every time I try to do something based on a fixed point, whether it's time, space, frequency, vibration, however you want to look at it, it doesn't hold for everybody. Now, I know people who work with fixed systems. They work with the chakra systems, the planet tunings, all sorts of other things. And that's fine for them. I mean, if it works for them, fine. I can't say you're doing something wrong necessarily because it's working for them and it's not me. But I found that personally, I can't work with anything that is fixed because everything keeps moving. It's like trying to chase something down. It's like, here it is, a cat with a laser pointer. It's like, okay, there's the dot, and the cat goes for it, and you move the laser. Well, everything keeps moving ahead and moving around. So I think people get caught up in that idea. Like you said, they're looking for this magic pill. They're looking for, if I get a 432 hertz singing bowl, I got it. I can do miracles and wonder, and I can do everything I need because I have this magic frequency. Where I think what's more important, and I teach this, I taught this at the Gong Camp in Europe, I teach this in all my workshops, is go into your gong room or your singing bowl room or wherever you have your instruments and just sit or stand in there and listen. What do you hear? Nothing. The instruments don't make any sound. They don't produce a sound until we bring the sound out of them by striking them, rubbing them, however we're creating the sound. The sound is actually right here. We bring the sound to the instruments. And also, along with that, we bring the intent of the sound. What are we going to try to do with this sound? How are we presenting it to the people? And I think there's this intent behind what you do is more important than saying, well, I have this object that is specifically to do this. And that's, like the story about my wife. It's like, well, let's try the bowl, see if something happens. And I played that one bowl and she goes, whoa, I can really feel that. Mm-hmm. So obviously that, worked on her knee. Now I could do that on somebody else and play it on their knee and they go, I don't feel anything. So again, my perspective is that everything is fluid and you need to learn to work with that fluidity and not get hung up on some sort of a fixed point, but try to work through things and with things and find that flow that the fluidity is a part of. Find that flow and work with that.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said because, especially what you said about, the sound is us interacting with the instrument, and it's kind of dynamically being changed as we interact with it, and that changes from moment to moment, just as we do. If we go play a
Mhm.
gong in the morning, how does it make us feel? Well, it might be completely different in the evening, and it's based on kind of our awareness and our state of being. um, and so, yeah, from my thought on that, I think the benefit to maybe a protocol which is fixed and rigid, like you said, could be maybe for a research aspect. Like if you really need to track what's happening
Mhm.
in the moment, in the moment with a specific protocol. But otherwise, that's not really individualized for the person and their moment and their needs.
And
What's
we
yeah,
can see this in medicine,
right.
where one treatment, whether it's a pill or a surgery or something else, will work for this person, but that same treatment doesn't work for another person, and they need a whole different regimen to take care of the same problem. So, you know, and I'm sure you've experienced it many, many times. Every session you do is different.
Completely different.
And
Yeah.
if you did something like the day before or the week before that was really great, and you go, I'm going to do that again, you can't.
Mm-mm.
You can't recreate that same magic or whatever happened because it was in the moment. So you have to try to find those new moments instead of trying to recreate the old moments because they're gone.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What's maybe just one other most common question or, gong myth you've had to dispel with people over the years?
Oh gosh, trying to think of
Why?
one here. Now I'm on the spot. um, just, I don't know, just a lot of people are just so hung up on frequency. And I have a whole chapter about frequency there, but I don't think people understand frequency, and they hear all this stuff about frequencies and finding frequencies and frequencies and tuning that it can be used interchangeably. So many people are looking for, I have this gong, if I get this tuning gong, will it work with it? Because I have a lot of people ask me about buying like a second gong or another gong, and they ask, well, I have a C sharp gong, should I get this this G gong, is that going to work with it? And what I tell them is I don't even know the tunings of my gongs because I don't care. I'm not playing with the symphony orchestra where I have to play in tune, with all the other instruments. Well, then I'm going to have specific tunings and know what's what. I just tell people, just play stuff and listen to it. Do you like the sound? You could say, well, I'm going to buy this G gong, and you buy it, and it's like you don't like the sound of it, and you don't like how it works with your other instruments, even though on paper it looked like a good match. Uh, and I used to tell this to drummers. I worked in music stores for many years, ran drum shops, and I'd say, they're looking for cymbals. I said, just go play cymbals. Don't look at the brand. Don't look at the type of cymbal that it is that's printed on it. Just play stuff and listen. And when you hear something you like, then play it and ask yourself, is this going to fit the purpose I need it to fit? So that's what I tell people about buying gongs, is if you get a chance to play them in person, great. Then just play them and listen to them. Don't look at what kind of gong it is, whether it's a Jupiter planet gong or it's a Cosmos gong or whatever. Just play it. Do you like the sound of it? Okay. Can you use it in your work? Even better. I mean, that's how I buy all my instruments. I just listen to them, and it's like, yeah, this will work. This will fit in with all my other stuff. I can see this being a usable sound for a gong sound session. And I might buy something else and say it's not going to work in a gong session, but when I play improvised music, this is going to be great because it's going to make this specific noise that is going to fit in real well. So I think that's a big thing is people get really hung up on like tunings and labels and things like that. Now, people ask me, here's a big question I got before I went to Gong Camp in Portugal. People were going, how do you fly your gongs there? Because I have such a big setup. And my response is, I don't fly gongs. Nobody wants to pay to fly them. I'm not going to pay to fly all my stuff. I just use whatever is there. And they're like, well, how can you do it? And it goes back to, well, the sound is here. I bring me wherever I go. And the first day at Gong Camp, there was probably 50, 60 gongs set up. I just went around and played all the gongs and made notes. Oh, I like the sound of this one. Oh, this one will fit with that. And then when it came time for my session and my master class and all that, I just assembled these gongs that I'd listened to. And I was able to play just like I play here because, again, here's the sound. I brought the sound with me. I found gongs that would fulfill the purpose I need, and I played them. So, yeah, don't get so hung up on labels and tunings. People ask me that all the time, and I just say, just listen. That's the only secret is listen. If you like something, then buy it, play it, use it. If you don't like it, then move on and find something else.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love how you put that in the book that you can hear a sound that you need in your collection, and eventually you'll find it, right? Eventually you might find it in a gong, but it's almost like you hear a certain type of tone or texture that you want, and that's what you're looking for to add to your collection.
Yeah, I always have, I mean, my head is full of sounds, and I'll hear something and I go, oh, there's that sound I've been hearing, and that'll fit right here. I can use it with these bells or these gongs or something. And what I tell beginners is a little different. I just say, just buy a gong.
Right.
Because you don't know anything. Your ear is not developed or anything. Just, find a gong that you kind of like and play it. And work with it, develop your ears, and then you will be able to ask better questions when you look to get a different or better gong. I mean, I still have my first gongs. I didn't know anything. I just took the catalog to my music store and said, here, I want these two gongs. The sizes sounded right. And it's like, I'll buy these two. I had the money and ordered them, got the gongs. It's like, oh, these are okay. Started playing them. I went back and said, well, I want these three gongs. I bought three more. But then I started learning about sound so I could be more discriminate and say, oh, okay, I want this specific instrument because it's going to do this and fit in here. But when you're a beginner, I mean, just go online, and there's a lot of different websites, the big gong dealers out there with videos. Listen to their videos. Listen to all kinds of gongs. I do that all the time just because I like to listen to gongs and hear what's out there. But go listen to some, and let's say you hear a Paiste Jupiter gong, and you go, oh, I like the sound of that. Or you hear a wind gong, like a 28-inch wind gong, and you go, oh, I like the sound of that. Buy one and start there. And as I said, you'll develop over time where your ears start to hear things, and you go, yeah, I like this gong, but it doesn't do X. So then you know what to look for, and you find a gong that does X, makes the sound or has the sort of tonality that you're missing.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And I think what's so wonderful about what you explore in your book, and what we'll go into that next, is really helping practitioners expand their offerings, right? Of course, we need to get our foundations first, understand some techniques, and actually just like a lot of experience and practice. That's one. And we're always doing that for decades, right? We're getting that experience. But what I like what you explored, I think will really kind of help people deepen what they're offering. And the first area you discuss is the feeling of a pulse, the arc of time. And of course, that's happening in the moment as your gongs are creating a wave, or, so can you just go into that a little bit, and what you're feeling as you, and you say, um, what is the concept that you have in your mind for the music you are making? You are asked that, what's the concept? And one of those areas is the pulse that you're feeling.
Hmm. Well, to me, pulse is very important. From being a professional drummer for all these years, time and pulse was a big thing I worked with. Now, in working with the gongs, it's an expanded sense of time and pulse. But each instrument, if you really listen closely to any gong or bowl or bell, almost all of them will have some sort of a pulse. Like you hit a gong and it'll go wah, 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 wah. You'll hear something like that. Or if you play a continual sound on it, if you're rolling on it, often that will come out too. So what I like to do is play along with those pulses, use those for timing different things. So if I have a gong going wah, 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 well, that might become the time that I'm working with. And I will time other instruments in with that. So maybe I'll strike a bell every 4 wahs or something like bing, wah, 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 bing, wah, 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 something like that. So I'm always listening to the pulses and using that for the timing. So I move to a different gong and it has a faster or slower pulse. Well, that changes my sense of, I guess you could say, the time base I'm working in. Same with the bells or bowls, any of those instruments. But then there's an overreaching arc too that is looking at these pulses in a longer sense of time and thinking in bigger events, but also thinking of adding silence in there too, which I think is extremely important, the use of silence. I talk about this in various places about, you really need silence to set off the sound. So listening to how, when you're playing this arc of sound, and then you let silence come in, and just feeling this sense of space between your notes before you play another note. So to me, I work with time and space as much as I work with the actual sounds themselves. And it's important where I place these sound events on that canvas of time and space. And that's how I work with everything, really, is I'm thinking in those terms. I have this sort of three-dimensional 360-degree canvas of time and space that is all around me. And then I have these instruments that I make these sounds, and I'm placing them in different places on this time and space continuum. And at least that's how I see it. I mean, I'm a very visual person, so I see all this in my mind as I'm doing it. And again, silence is so important, and I think it's forgotten by a lot of people who just play continual sound. And I like to try to use silence to let everything breathe. If you just keep talking and you just keep going and you're going and going and you never take a breath, you need to talk and then you go and you take a breath. There's a pause in there. So silence is as much sort of that breath in between sounds, just like we would do in between words or sentences. So it's really important to think in the terms of that sort of timing. But you can have your small timing, which is the instrument pulses, and your large arcs of time, which is you're sensing how all this fits together in a longer space with both sound and silence interlocked together.
Right. And yeah, well, a couple of things there. I mean, the way you're describing it, it sounds like you're painting a
Oh yeah,
landscape.
I think of myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think of myself as a sound painter, and individual sounds are different colors, and So like I said, my canvas is time and space, and I'm just painting these sounds upon this time and space canvas. That's essentially is how I think of myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what you described talks about pulse and rhythm, but there's also in your book, I think you call it a call to melody or something like that. You're also creating melody in the patterns that you're creating with tones. Can you talk a little bit about how that correlates, how that works?
Yeah, I think melody is a missing element. Not everybody has a big setup like I use or Mike Tamburo uses and has all the instruments to provide different tones. But to me, melody is important. I grew up in the 60s listening to pop music as a child, and that's really stuck with me. And pop music in the 60s and 70s, it was so melodic. And I just got this idea of melody in my head here, and I've kept that over the years. And on my setup, besides the gongs being, although they're not to specific tunings, I do have them set up to form sort of a melodic whole together. And my whole setup is all built to fit together like one instrument. Like, how a piano has 88 keys, but it's one instrument. I have like 40 or 50 different instruments, but they're all one big instrument. And within that, I have a set of copper clad bells from India that I've picked out over the years to form a scale. I have some actual tuned gongs, some dream embao gongs that I have in a pentatonic scale. And then I have, I'm using four Burma bells that form a scale. I have my singing bowls and rin bowls that all form a scale. So I'm able to play melodies on these four different elements. And it goes back to this pop music idea, how we're all inundated with music. Since we're born, or even in utero, we can hear music. The ears are one of the first organs to really develop. So we've heard music our whole lives. And if you go to a big sporting event, and they start playing a song and everybody knows the words, they'll sing along to it. Because that's just sort of human nature. Or, if you're in your car and a song comes on, you start singing along to it. So we all have this innate sense of melody, even though we might not be trained musicians at all. It's a cultural thing. You think, music is in every culture of the world, music of some sort. So it's a very innate human activity, is music. So we all have this sense of music and sense of melody. And part of my thing is I like to use my tuned instruments to play melodies at my sessions because I think that connects with people on a very intuitive level. Because again, we all love melody. So if I play a little melody on the bells, that's something people, even if they're lying down, and they're chilled out, their subconscious mind will still go, "Oh, that's a little melody. Isn't that cute?" And then I might play the same melody later in the session, and their brain is going to go, "Oh, there's that melody again." It gives them a connection, something they can relate to, as opposed to if I'm just playing big gongs and playing noise and crashes and all, they're not going to relate to that completely. But if I give them parts of melodies here and there, it's something, again, it's so innate in our human species that they're going to listen there and they're going to connect to that. Or I like to use a kalimba, and I'll walk around with my kalimba and play, a little song, and people connect to that because it's a melody. So often I'll use these melodies as sort of a bridge between playing other more, I guess you could say, non-melodic ideas on the gongs and maybe just rhythmic ideas like on my shakers and things like that. But I'll use melodies as a bridge because it's an event people can relate to. And I've always liked it when I've gone to somebody else's session and they play some sort of, melody thing. Well, like you use your violin. And what do you play on that? You're just not going, you're playing melodic ideas, little things. And so I think, people will use like a Native American flute or something else, but it's just this idea of melody because it's something everybody can connect to. And the reason I'm there doing what I'm doing is to connect to people. So if that playing little melodies here and there can help connect and bring them into what I'm doing, I think that's really an important thing.
Right. Yeah. So pulse, melody, and then you mentioned silence as well, which is
Silence.
huge. And this is my favorite quote from the book, I think, out of the whole book, from your book. This is page 48. When you are playing the gong, you need to embrace the silence. You need to trust it and yourself, because on the other side of silence is a chance to experience so much more. So play your gong, let it ring out, let it fade away, and resist the temptation to jump right in and strike it again. Wait a little bit longer. Go with the uncomfortable feeling that some sound should be happening. Go with it and look inside yourself. Wait a little longer, then play another note. And if you're playing with others and they trust you, they will follow you into the silence. Embrace the silence. And I think that's just such a metaphor for our lives now, our distractions. We always need to be moving to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so this takes me to what I'm going to call your companion book, because I received them at the same time, Art as a Spiritual Practice. Right. And actually, I think everything you've talked about and the way that you work and the way that you describe your, I guess you could say, intuitive compositions is very much like you're doing Tai Chi or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one way I look at it.
Yeah. So let's move into that aspect. And I don't really call these books separate. I think that they're completely related. But how do you find your work with the instruments with gongs as an art and spiritual practice?
Well, as I tell people, usually when I'm doing a workshop or something, I talk about when I'm up here with my instruments. This is my temple. This is a sacred space. It's where I can be completely me and where I can express myself completely. And for me, sound is everything. I, ever since I was a little kid, I've just been totally fascinated by sounds. And the fact that I can create these sounds just amazes me. I mean, I could play gongs, all day long, and not get tired of it because it's fascinating, and it has this ability to take me to other places. So for me, it is a spiritual practice, and the book about making your art a spiritual practice, it has nothing to do with religion. I mean, you could be any sort of religion or non-religious or whatever, but it's the idea of the sacredness of what you do as your art form, whether you play gongs or sing or dance or paint or even other things that you just do in life. I mean, it can become a sacred practice, like washing the dishes or washing, doing the laundry, cooking food, anything. We can make anything a spiritual practice if we look at it from a certain perspective of how does this enrich us? How does this complete us? And I see, at least for me, it's important to have this as sort of my spiritual practice because it's when I'm playing gongs or other instruments or when I'm writing, I see both of those as spiritual practices that I do because it's the essence of who I am. It's me at the very core. And I think if you can look at things that way, I mean, I never look at it like, oh gosh, I got to go play gongs again. It's like, even though I've got to carry all these cases and load them out of my house into my van, drive there, take them out, set them up, play, pack them up, bring it all back, which is, it's a lot of work. But I look at it like, well, I have this opportunity to be in my sacred space and to make these sounds and to connect with other people. And it's amazing. I can't, I can't say enough about how privileged and honored I feel to be able to do that. Or, teaching, doing workshops and master classes and just, again, connecting with people. But I see this, this is my spiritual practice. This is just who I am.
Yeah, and there's the aspect to it. You actually write about in both books, kind of the beginner's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Both the childlike, playful wonder, but also the simplicity of it. And you talk about that with washing dishes or making a cup of tea. It has a lot to do with being present, right? And
Right.
nothing will deter you.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I take a lot of cues from Zen Buddhism, although I'm not a Zen Buddhist and I don't practice Zazen and anything like that. But I find that a lot of what the Zen Buddhists are saying really cuts to the heart of things. And for them, it is that simple as making everything a spiritual practice, no matter what you're doing. But I think it's, beginner's mind. I talk about that a lot. And the book I mentioned is Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki, which I came across, probably in my early 20s when I discovered that book. And I read it and it just blew my mind because he was talking about this whole essence of really just being present. Whatever you're doing, be present. And there's the idea of Zen mind, beginner's mind. I can't remember the exact how the quote goes, but it's like in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the master's mind there are few. It's like as you go along through life doing an activity, sometimes you kind of end up putting on blinders and you get caught in what you're doing. It's like it's comfortable. It's like, okay, I just keep doing my thing here. But a beginner doesn't have any of that because everything is new. So I try to always approach, when I go up to play, I try to approach it as, okay, this is the first time I've ever done this. And this is amazing. What am I going to do? Like I did a session last Saturday. It was so completely different than I just looked around. It's like, oh, I never start with the Burma bells. I'm going to start with those. It just intrigued me. I wanted these whirling sounds spinning around. And I started from there. And the session took on a whole different character than it usually does because I was, I had beginner's mind. I was taking it completely new. But it goes back to being in the moment. I study time a lot. I think because I was a drummer all these years and time was my place. I kept the time in the bands and that. But I would always play games with the time. And I think other musicians in my bands weren't always happy about that because I would play all these little rhythmic things, polyrhythmic things and whatever, just to see how I could push and pull time and stretch it. But time fascinates me. And then again, reading all this Zen material and Buddhist material and working with alchemy and Hermeticism, Gnosticism, all these different things, there really is only now, the moment. So in my sessions, to me, that is the most important thing, is to hopefully have people be in the moment. So they're not lying down and they're thinking about, oh, when I'm done with this gong thing, I have to go to the grocery store and I think I need milk and eggs. No. Or thinking about what happened like the day before at work or with their kids or whatever. I want them to be present, to be there. And it's just like, there's only now. The future doesn't exist and the past doesn't exist. The only thing there is now. So if we can focus on the now, that's where all the magic happens. And that's where beginner's mind can really, take over, because you're in the now. And it's like, this is brand new, because every now is new. Like, there's a now right here. And there's also a now right here, but it's different than the now just 2 seconds ago. So if we can live within the now, within the moment, and keep that beginner's mind, especially as gong players, as musicians, singing bowl players, whatever we're using, that helps keep it fresh and it helps keep us engaged, because again, it's not like, okay, I'm doing the same thing and that's all I can see. And, the last thing I want is to become jaded about it or anything. And the minute I get that way, I'm going to stop, if that ever happens. And that's kind of what happened with playing drums in bands. I'd done it for like 30 years and I'd played all kinds of music, all kinds of places. And it's just, my wife and son came to see me one time, and afterwards they said, "You look so bored up there." I was like, yeah, I was bored. So shortly after that, I quit that band, and, I haven't looked back since, because like I was bored with it and I didn't want to do that. So it's like, I like this better. Okay, I'm more excited about this. So I really moved, head on into doing the gongs and other resonating metals.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, one aspect, I think this would be a nice kind of closing for us, that will leave people with something that they can create into a practice or a ritual that will really enhance what they're doing as practitioners, is you call it mindful listening, and
Mm-hmm.
also deep listening. Maybe just talk a little bit about how people can set up a mindful listening practice that will keep them in the now, in the present, and it can be really a meditative experience as well.
The big thing is just pay attention. We are so bombarded with sound. I would have liked to have lived like, 200 or 300 years ago. Just if I could go back in time and just see what it's like, I'm sure it's a lot quieter. But if you live in a city like I do, I mean, there's always traffic noise and there might be airplanes overhead and there's other people and kids and, construction and all this. We learn to shut out sounds. But I think it's important to sometimes just listen. What's going on? Like I'm a become kind of a big birder, and I have bird feeders in my backyard. I have a big backyard, and I like to just go out there and just sit and listen to the birds. But also I'll hear a truck drive by, or I'll hear, the wind in the trees and things like that. It's just, listen to the world around you and develop this sense that, yes, we can shut all that out, but we can also take it in when we want to. And I think it's important to just listen to the world. And then also, when you go to play your instruments, bring in all this listening that you've done. I try to actually recreate a lot of the organic sounds that I hear with my instruments. I try to create wind sounds, water sounds, bird sounds, animal sounds, insect sounds, all sorts of things like that I've actively listened to and not so much studied, but I mean, I've listened to them and I know how they sound. So I think it's important to really just listen to your world. Take 10 minutes, go in your backyard, go in your front yard, and just, instead of looking at your phone or something, just listen. Now, fun thing I had, the Gong Camp in Portugal was out in the country, sort of out in the middle of nowhere at this farm that they've turned into like a retreat center. And from the main facilities to the building where the all the gongs were was probably, I don't know, maybe a half a mile walk. And that became my favorite part of the day, was walking back and forth. Like often it was like, 5 times back and forth. So there would be 10 walks. And that was one of my favorite things, because walking down this gravel path and this gravel road and across the field and just listening. And there were birds, the wind in the trees, there were church bells. And I noticed there were 2 sets of church bells that were a couple minutes off. So like way in the distance, like on the hour, you'd hear the church bells. And then a minute after the hour, the closer ones would ring. But if I hadn't actively listened to that, I would have never known that. But it was like, this is weird. So I actually timed it as like they were a minute apart. But I love taking the walk and just listening to the world. What kind of sounds are there? What kind of different sounds? And I hear, where I live at my house. So I think, active listening, listen to your world and bring that into you, and then bring that out of you into your sounds that you make. I think that's really important.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's beautiful. And it can really inform how you make music and melody and time in your sessions, but also have you tune into the subtleties of
Right,
sound.
right. Silence, there it is. Oftentimes you listen and you don't hear much. You might hear just little sounds, but it's not always like things going on. Oftentimes there is this sort of silence. Although, as John Cage taught us, there never really is silence because there's always something going on. But there's a lot of silence in between events in nature. Like if you're sitting outside, it's unless there's construction going on, or somebody's having a new roof put on and they're pounding nails all day long. Okay, that's an exception to it. But if you're outside, and especially in the country, there's just a lot of quiet. And the importance of that too, that I teach my students, is if there's just sound and you play another sound, people won't necessarily notice it, because it's just a part of the sound that's going on. But the minute you introduce silence and let silence happen, then you play a new sound, it it comes out of this silence, and people notice it because it came out of silence. It didn't try to compete with the other sounds going on. And that's a thing you can learn from nature. It's just listening to how the sounds come and go. It gets quiet. Then a bird makes a noise and you go, oh, there's that robin singing, or that cardinal singing. You can identify the sounds and hear them, because if there's construction and the birds are chirping and singing, you might not hear them because there's just so much sound going on. But out of the silence, sound can emerge.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to recommend The Way of the Gong and Art as a Spiritual Practice to everyone. They've been really wonderful to dive into for me. And like I said, they're so marked up. All these things that I'm going to refer back to, all these wonderful gems, about the gong craft, gong community, philosophy, and just explorations
Mhm.
of spirit as well, and connection. How can people get copies of these? What's the best way to find them?
Well, they should be up on my website by the end of the month, which
Okay.
is GONGTOPIA.com. I'm actually in the process of rebuilding my website, which is kind of a crazy thing to try to do.
Yeah.
But I should have the books for sale up there by the end of the month. So just keep checking back. And yeah, I'll have them at all my gigs and all my workshops that I do too. So if you're coming to one of those, I will have books.
Great. Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks, Michael. It's been really great to connect with you again and to read your books. I really enjoyed them. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Natalie. It's been great to talk.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much for tuning into this 5-year anniversary episode of Sounds Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com. You can follow and check out things at Facebook, Sounds Heal Studio, Instagram at Natalie Brown, Sounds Heal, on YouTube, on the Sounds Heal Studio channel. And thanks again for supporting this podcast. Be well and stay tuned.